The history of China. The history of China can be divided into the different dynasties that ruled the land. A dynasty is a series of leaders from one family. Many of these dynasties had significant impacts on the life and culture of the Chinese people as well as the surrounding region. So, the objective here from this podcast is to get you to see the individual achievements of each empire and put it into perspective and maybe get a better grasp on the individual empires because an initial look at China can be pretty overwhelming. So, the first dynasty that I'm going to discuss is the Shang dynasty. The Shang dynasty was the first Chinese dynasty for which there were both written records and archaeological evidence of its existence. The exact dates of the Shang dynasty are in dispute. One of the most important innovations of the Shang dynasty was the development of Chinese writing. The Chinese used symbols called pictographs and wrote on bones and shells. The Shang used writing for many purposes, including record keeping, but people are most fascinated by the use of writing on oracle bones. People in the Shang dynasty wrote questions on bones and tortoise shells that they wanted to ask their dead ancestors. People asked about what crops to grow, when to hunt, and whether warfare would be successful. These bones and shells were then burned, and someone would interpret the cracks in the bones as the answers to their questions. Archaeologists have found more than 100,000 of these bones. They've also identified more than 3,000 pictographs in the language of the Shang that would go on to become the foundation of the Chinese written language. The next one we're going to take a look at is the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty is the longest ruling dynasty in China's history. The Zhou tribes from western China conquered the Shang dynasty, their neighbor to the east, and established their own ruling dynasty. The Zhou dynasty later gradually lost control over the kingdom, which eventually collapsed into warring states, but we'll get into that later. So out of the Zhou dynasty comes an idea called the Mandate of Heaven. According to this way of thinking, the Zhou had been given the right to rule by heaven. All of the dynasties following the Zhou had adopted this concept. The Chinese people believed the mandate was granted because of the virtue or moral and ethical behavior of the ruler, not because of his bloodline. As a result, the right to rule did not have to remain with one family. The ancient Chinese believed dynasties would lose the mandate of heaven if the rulers did not behave in a benevolent or a good manner towards their subjects. To maintain order throughout their kingdom, the Zhou followed a feudal model. In this system, members of the nobility were given land in return for their loyalty and service to the emperor. Which brings us to the Warring States period. The Warring States period from 475 to 221 BCE came about as a result of the Zhou losing control of their empire. The lords of individual states began to fight each other in attempts to gain control of more land, people, and resources. Lords were overthrown, alliances between states formed and dissolved, and life was chaotic and dangerous. Now, during this period of chaos, Chinese intellectuals searched for a solution to the disorder and violence that surrounded them. Three philosophies came out of this chaos: Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. Each came up with three drastically different solutions to the problem. The philosophies continue to affect Chinese culture, government, and society today. But we'll discover more about these later. The next dynasty we're going to take a look at is the Qin dynasty. Out of the chaos of the warring states came the period known as the Qin dynasty. This is the first dynasty that could actually be considered an empire, and it lasted from 221 to 206. The first emperor of this particular dynasty practiced an approach to government called legalism, as I had mentioned earlier. And legalism emphasized strict laws and an efficient government. He was a harsh ruler, and he had political rivals and those he saw as opponents executed. To discourage dissent or disagreement, he burned all books that did not deal with agriculture, medicine, or historical records about his reign. However, he did not burn the books that were stored in the imperial library. The importance of this dynasty can't be overstated because the name China actually comes from Qin. The Han Dynasty lasted approximately 400 years, and during this particular era, the arts, literature, and science flourished. In addition to establishing a civil service exam, which is an exam that you would give people who wanted government positions, that way you would get the best qualified person in the job, the Han required that their public servants have some cultural accomplishments. The Han invented paper and developed clocks, sundials, and even a seismograph, which is an instrument for detecting and measuring earthquakes. The cultural impact of this dynasty was so great that modern Chinese still call themselves the Han people. With the fall of the Han and the central government weakened, ambitious generals and warlords took advantage of the power vacuum to try to seize control of China. The result was constant, brutal war that cost many thousands of lives. As a result of this fighting, the most powerful warlords eventually took control and divided China into 3 separate kingdoms. So there we have the 3-kingdom period. The next dynasty is the Sui dynasty. It lasting from 581 to 618. It was the beginning of a golden age of art and culture. It was short-lived, but it was the beginning of a great period. The religion of Buddhism was encouraged to flourish alongside Confucianism. Many large and beautiful stone Buddhist statues throughout China were constructed during the Sui era. Now, the Tang era, lasting from 618 to 906. It's an age of prosperity. Many civic improvements were made throughout the empire. One of the most important developments was the Grand Canal. The canal connected a network of canals that already existed across northern and southern China. The canal helped to improve trade and travel throughout the empire and brought wealth to more of the country than ever before. Okay, we have the Song dynasty, and the Song dynasty became divided into the northern and the southern Song dynasty. Lasting from 960 to 1279, the era of the Song dynasty is considered by many historians to be a golden age. Many policies from the Sui and the Tang dynasties were carried on. These included the systems of land distribution and taxation. The Song dynasty leaders also built on the ideas of the Han dynasty, promoting the most skilled to positions of wealth and power. The leaders strengthened the education system and created a civil service exam, a test taken by candidates for certain government jobs. These tests stressed the teachings of Confucius. An individual's performance on the test determined whether or not he received the job. The next dynasty is the Yuan dynasty, founded in 1280 and ending in 1365. This is a non-Chinese dynasty. Mongol invader Genghis Khan and his hordes conquered much of Asia, including China, and his grandson, Kublai Khan, established this dynasty, during which the Mongols reopened and expanded overland trade routes linking China, Central Asia, and the Mediterranean. The Ming dynasty. Now, this is the last of the great dynasties. It was founded in 1368 and lasted until 1644. This dynasty wraps up our in-depth examination of the dynasties. It's like stated earlier, it's the last of the outstanding or great dynasties. It was vibrant during its first half, but it was racked with internal problems during its second half. Scores of workers were constructed the renowned Forbidden City, an imperial palace of staggering proportions. And so the very last dynasty is the Qing dynasty. The Manchus took over the Ming dynasty and created the Qing dynasty, lasting from 1644 to 1912. It fell victim to European ambitions, and it was eventually overthrown by revolution, ending the dynastic period of China. So what do we have here? Quite a bit, but not so much. I hope it's not so overwhelming. You have the Shang, the Zhao, leading to the Warring States period, where Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism comes out. Then you have the Qin dynasty and the Han dynasty, which lasted about 400 years. Out of the Han dynasty, you have more division and confusion in the Three Kingdoms period. Then you have the short-lived Sui dynasty, which gives birth to the Tang dynasty and the Song dynasty, both golden periods of Chinese history. The Yuan dynasty, the non-Chinese Mongol dynasty, which is replaced by the Ming, which eventually is replaced by the last dynasty of all, the Qing. I hope this clears some of the confusion up. And that concludes this podcast.